the latest weather, traffic, and news updates online at 560theanswer.com. Listen to AM 560 The Answer online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, and on TuneIn, iHeart, and on Odyssey.
From the Matrix Home Solutions Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560 The Answer.
America First with Sebastian Gorka, today at 3, right before Sean Thompson at 4 on AM 560 The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. So Joe Biden fielded some questions from the D.C. press corps yesterday, and fortunately that gave him time, waiting till Monday, to have his team script some answers for him so that he didn't
I saw what you were talking about. He had notes.
So he didn't commit to things that are actually adverse to his administration's stated policies, like regime change. He didn't walk back anything he said, but he did clarify the things that he didn't walk back.
Are you worried that other leaders in the world are going to start to doubt that America is back if some of these big things that you say on the world stage keep getting walked back?
What's getting walked back?
It made it sound like, just in the last couple days, it sounded like you told U.S. troops they were going to Ukraine. It sounded like you said it was possible the U.S. would use a chemical weapon, and it sounded like you were calling for regime change in Russia, and we know...
None of the three occurred.
None of the three occurred?
None of the three.
Mr. President?
You interpret the language that way. I was talking to the troops. We were talking about helping train the troops that are the Ukrainian troops that are in Poland. That's what the context. I sat there with those guys for a couple hours. That's what we talked about.
So when you said you're going to see when you're there, you were not intending to
I was referring to meeting with and talking with the Ukrainian troops that were in Poland.
And when you said a chemical weapon use by Russia would trigger a response in kind?
It will trigger a significant response.
What does that mean?
I'm not going to tell you. Why would I tell you? You got to be silly.
The world wants to know?
The world wants to know a lot of things. I'm not telling them what the response would be. Then Russia knows the response.
Well, the world would like to know something else. Ducey missed this one. So you're talking about the 82nd Airborne. You're talking about training Ukrainian troops in Poland. Are the Russians in Poland, Mr. President? Because you mentioned in your comments you're going to see things like the people, Ukrainians, standing in front of Russian tanks. You're going to bear witness to essentially the atrocities of Vlad Putin. Well, how are you going to do that if you're not in Ukraine? All kinds of questions for the big guy. For more on all this, pleased to be joined by Nadia Schadlow. She's a fellow at the Hoover Institution and the Hudson Institute. Nadia, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Dan and Amy. Happy to be here.
So the president didn't walk back, but he did clarify the misinterpretations that people who understand the English language have about what he said over the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of confusion out there. I mean, which, in some ways can be helpful sometimes, but not all the time. Deterrence is a mixture of will and capability, and sort of broadcasting what we will or won't do. I think it takes it's a delicate balance, which I'm not sure we've achieved.
Well, he said he was declaring moral outrage, not regime change. But yet Blinken and others, they were doing cleanup for 48 hours straight.
Yeah, I think he certainly misspoke. Clearly he misspoke. Clearly, the last thing we want to do is project, is be talking about regime change.
Well,
in that context.
Yeah, did he misspeak, or was it just an excited utterance? Maybe that is his actual position. It's hard to know. And the confusion you talk about that has a deterrent effect, that's supposed to be when you're instilling confusion in your adversary, not when you're confused.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's been part of the problem has been not figuring out who the audience is, right? So I'd written a piece last week on this concept of deterrence. Not my concept; it's a well-known strategic concept that has existed, for centuries. It's a mixture of will and capability. You have the will to do something and you broadcast that will, but you also have the capability, meaning the military force, to back it up. We certainly have a lot of capabilities, but early on in this crisis, the White House failed to really articulate our will. That doesn't mean we will. That does not mean that we would actually deploy troops to Ukraine. Right? There's a difference. But saying what we won't do all the time since December, saying we will not do this, we will not do that, you sort of undercut the value of deterrence. Right? December, January, February, constant statements of what we would not do, which sends the wrong signal at that time to Putin.
Like the minor incursion incident.
Right. In December, it was no troops. It was we will be, we would allow a minor incursion. In February, it was a consistent discussion of what we would not do. We had no intention of fighting Russia. Now, these might be the right policies internally, deliberations, but you do not want to broadcast your adversaries your thinking and your options. You want to create complexity for the adversary. You want to keep your options open.
What is your assessment of how Zelensky has been playing the game, if you will? On the one hand, he telegraphs that Ukraine, reportedly he telegraphed Ukraine is willing to go to neutrality, and that requires more definition, but essentially that would be we're not going to ally with NATO, we're not going to pursue NATO, as well as give up any interest in nuclear weapons in order for an armistice. But then at the same time, he also demands that Putin meet him face-to-face in order for a peace agreement to be hammered out, something that Putin said he wouldn't do. How do you think he's been moving chess pieces about the board?
Right. Well, I think his dilemma is different. You can't apply every formula in the exact same way, but he's in a different situation. So as he approaches, he wants to express a willingness to say, look, we're willing to come to the table. And that's appropriate because that's what he's messaging. He's sending out a whole range of options, probably, I would say, to indicate that there's some flexibility in there. I think he actually cares about his country. He wants it to be rebuilt, not destroyed. He wants Ukrainians to come home, not to stay away. So I think he's willing to show some flexibility in what a negotiated solution should look like. He's been brilliant at curating his messages to different audiences, to the U.S. Congress, to different parliaments around Europe. I mean, clearly he's a charismatic, brilliant leader. He's been, unfortunately, he found himself in the right place at the right time. So I think his job is different than Biden's job as this war unfolded, right? They had a different message that they needed to convey, and Zelensky understands that.
Does the Biden administration, starting with the big guy, just have a fundamental misunderstanding of the world and the geopolitical challenges it presents? And for that, I referenced this piece by our friend Jacob Griegel, who's a professor at Catholic University.
Oh, he's a great friend of mine, by the way.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah. All right. Well, let's see if you're still friends after you respond to this. He wrote, the Biden administration has been vocal in defending what it calls the rules-based international order, but there's no such thing. An earth-spanning security space governed by global rules or few key powers doesn't exist, and the war in Ukraine should remind us. There's also no global threat facing all states equally, but rather regional revisionist powers threatening nearby states. Temporary regional equilibria with their own power dynamics are driven by local historical competitions. They are unstable and prone to wars. They require persistent attention and management. Rather than this utopian idea, there's a rules-based international order, understand there are regional power centers and conflicts, and they need to be dealt with delicately and within that context. That's a much different understanding of the world than the one the Biden administration is projecting.
Yeah, I mean, not surprisingly, I completely agree with Jakob. There are no global solutions to problems, right? Problems occur. The solutions to problems begin at the local level. and then move up. There's no global governance, thank goodness, and there are really no global institutions that have effective operational capabilities. That means that states provide institutions with money, with resources, with people even. So that's one key important point that Jakob has made. A second is that the regional problems are different, right? You have a different set of problems in Europe than you do in Asia, than you might in Latin America, than Africa. So working on those problem sets in a regional capacity gives you a better chance to actually get to outcomes that you want, right? Get to solutions that you want. The Biden administration's approach, but it's not just his approach. I think this is a general divide between the left and the right, is to pursue activities first and foremost through multilateral organizations, as opposed to looking at what can be done at the more local or state level, right? There's sort of a belief that these organizations that are really best suited for communication, for talking, as opposed to doing.
Yeah, central planners will centrally plan.
Right.
I mean, it's sort of a central
Right.
planner's vision of the world, as opposed to, the small d Democrat who believes in subsidiarity.
Right, exactly.
Hmm.
Exactly.
Exactly. I wanted to get to your intuition on this as well. Abramovich is one of the oligarchs that Zelensky asked the Biden administration not to impose sanctions on because he thought Abramovich could be useful in brokering peace between Russia and Ukraine. Now there's a report out that Abramovich, as he was bouncing around Ukraine and Belarus and Russia, could have been poisoned, as well as other Ukrainian peace negotiators. That's sort of an old go-to of Putin. And what does that say about Putin's interest in any serious interest in peace if that report turns out to be accurate?
I mean, I'm just conjecture like everyone else, but it sends a pretty alarming, disturbing signal, right? That he really is not interested in trying to find a negotiated solution if he's ready to poison, someone who purportedly was a friend of his, right? Or it sends a sense of Putin just wants to send fear out. He wants to imbue everyone around him with fear. I think that's pretty clear, and possibly the negotiators as well. It's not beyond him to do this, right? It's too bad that they couldn't be tested at the right time to actually make a clear determination of what happened. But he certainly wants to send fear. It's certainly the opposite of Zelensky, who seems to be projecting a sense of openness toward a negotiated solution because he cares about lives.
Do you fear
Putin.
Do you fear that Putin's going to use chemical weapons? And as Biden says, will we respond in kind?
Yeah, I think Biden misspoke clearly, and he was corrected about that. Right, it sounded very much like we would respond with chemical weapons, which I agree is. yeah. But I think Putin, who knows? Putin can certainly. He basically de facto has. I mean, in Syria, the Russians were key supporters of the Assad regime that used chlorine gas against Syrian citizens. So the record is there, and hopefully, obviously, it would be a catastrophe if he did that.
And with respect to the escalation here, the response from the West. Not telegraphed, but as we're talking about it here, thinking strategically, what should it be at this point? Is setting the rhetoric aside, is all we should do and really can do to help chart Ukraine's course, to help them in charting their own course, is to provide these weapon systems that have been provided? Is there anything else obvious that we're missing that would not escalate the situation?
There isn't. I don't think there's anything obvious. Maybe there's more use of cyber capabilities and things that we could be doing, sort of in that world. More weapons of different kinds. There really aren't defensive or offensive weapons in some ways. In this case, Ukraine is using them defensively. They're protecting, right? They're protecting their territory. They're protecting their people. Their mission is defensive. But there are longer term things that we need to do that this crisis has shown us, right? We need to go back to a sensible energy policy. that puts the United States at the center of that solution, right? Where we had energy independence under the previous administration, and moving away from that is crazy and does not make strategic sense. We need to, develop policies that allow, brain drain really from Russia, right? Encourage Russian scientists and tech people to come to the United States. So there are longer term policies. I mean, not right now for that, but over the longer term, we need to watch China's role in this situation and ensure that China doesn't become sort of the global arbiter of this, which, China's trying to position itself now to mediate. So there's some longer term policies, but in the near term, and also reaffirm our commitment to NATO, and continue to send different types of weapons to Ukraine quickly, and hopefully work behind the scenes to move toward a negotiated solution that preserves Ukrainian sovereignty.
Well, and we seem to be at cross purposes, at least according to our friend Jim Carafano at the Heritage Foundation, who was very concerned about this Iran nuclear deal that may be inked soon, that he suggested gives Russia a backdoor to avoid sanctions. So that doesn't make much sense. And also suggested, because of the glide path it could provide Iran to nuclear weapons, could instigate a regional war in the Middle East with an Israeli response to such a weapons program. What's your view on that?
I mean, I think Jim's exactly right. I mean, I should have also mentioned, to your point about a backdoor for Russian oil and gas. Europe is still buying Russian gas and oil right now. There's something like $1 billion a day going into Russia, which I was shocked to find. I mean, I don't understand it. So there are still apertures that we could be closing and should be closing, right? So Jim is exactly right. We are sitting next to the Russians at the table to negotiate one of the most important agreements that the Biden administration is wedded to. I mean, I don't think it's a good agreement at all. But the fact that we're still sitting with Russia at the table sort of as an equal negotiator while we're watching what's happening in Europe is a complete disconnect. It makes no sense.
She is Nadia Schadlow, fellow at the Hoover Institution and the Hudson Institute. Nadia, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
There's only one radio show in Chicago talking about today's biggest stories and telling you what they really mean. That show is this one, Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
Have you ever thought you'd like to buy and sell houses but didn't know how or where to get the money? My name is Ron LeGrand, and over the past 40 years, I've bought over 3,000 houses without using my money or credit and taught thousands to do the same. Today, even in a virtual environment, we buy nice houses in nice neighborhoods using no banks, realtors, contractors, or other costly entanglements, and build huge cash flow and wealth without the hassle of tenants, all without credit and little or no money. You don't need a license or experience, and I'll show you exactly how it's done. Text RON to 99799 and I'll send you my free training. I promise I'll change the way you think about real estate